Can you imagine spending Christmas with your feuding relatives, yelling and screaming at each other, fighting about who deserves to be in charge? Well, of course you can. Can't we all relate to at least some of that? Okay, well, not to the histrionic degree that we see in this movie, but what most of us regular Joes will never experience are discussions about who will be the next King of England. Dealing with an undercooked turkey, or trying to handle pouty kids, or battling snowy roads doesn't seem so bad compared to the self-inflicted misery these jerkweeds deal with in The Lion in Winter, or having a dog sniff herself and lick the bed over beside you. We have a foster dog, by the way. Her name is Leona. But these people lived 840 years ago, and they weren't able to do something you can do in the here and now, and that's log on to your device and search for Sparkplug Coffee. Our sponsor wishes you a good holiday, and they also wish you would listen to the next 60 to 90 seconds as I tell you that they have the freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans in this country of Canada. They've got a slew of blends and roasts, including different seasonal blends, and they've also got half-calf and decaf. After all, not everybody wants to be pouring caffeine into their yapper. Sparkplug delivers to customers in the US and Canada within a week, and if your postal code is Canadian, then you'll get free shipping. So our countrymen and countrywomen save money by not having to pay for the effort of getting their orders to their front porch. But we've got another way on top of that to keep your coins in your change purse. That's by becoming a member of Sparkplug's Autopilot Coffee Club. Now, this isn't a Coffee of the Month club. Things won't be shipped whether you're ready for more or not. In fact, you can cancel or even just pause your membership anytime. Members get perks and deals, and they even save money on every order. Ready to find their website? If you haven't already, go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES. That HYES promo code will save you 20% off your next order. Look, more savings. Well, I might not have any use for royalty, but I've enjoyed plenty of films about kings and queens, including this one. So let's start talking about it. But first, Bev, ask Andrew for a Christmas gift by playing our holiday theme song.
And action! Have you ever seen
The Lion in Winter? Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, film friendos, and thanks for tearing yourself away from family adventures on this Christmas Eve to spend some time listening to the 557th edition of Have You Ever Seen? And this is going to go up on Christmas Eve because we're going to be busy on Christmas Day, so one day earlier than normal. We're the legends in our own minds who review classic movies and see how they've held up over the decades, and we spoil the regal snot out of them. Regal snot, the best kind of snot. I'm the heir apparent to no powerful position whatsoever who demands that when I bellow, bellow back. Ryan Ellis of Aquitaine. And here's the lady who thinks it's dear of me to let her out of jail, even if it's only for the holidays. My wife, Beverly the Lionhearted.
That's me.
Did you know that this Richard was Richard the Lionhearted, the famous king, and of course his brother, Prince John?
So this is the second movie we've covered where he's a character because he was in... Come on.
Well, no, Robin Hood.
Yeah, that's what I meant. The Adventures of Robin Hood.
Oh, I'm thinking of
I was setting you up.
Costner one, which we haven't covered, but yes, we have done The Adventures of Robin Hood, that's right. And Prince John is the villain in most stories, other than the Costner one, where it's the Sheriff of Nottingham, where he's the bad guy. I don't think Prince John's even portrayed in that movie at all. And he's quite the loser in this thing. We weren't a fan of this guy's performance.
Yeah.
It's not the actor's fault. He's apparently a good actor.
It
But
might be the actor's fault.
I think it's maybe the choice in the writing and the direction. By the way, before we get going any further, Bev has got another cold and probably won't sound very good today.
I didn't get a cold for 4 years. I got COVID a few times, but I got no colds during the entire pandemic, and I'm just getting them all now. It is just a never-ending stream of illnesses.
Okay, the coming attractions opinion question for The Lion in Winter. The storyline throughout the film is that King Henry II wants his son John to be successor to the throne, while Queen Eleanor wants their son Richard to be the man in the chair. Which of them do you think deserves the gig, or is it someone else entirely who deserves to be the future King of England or Queen? Or are you like me and think the whole stupid thing should be abolished?
I do think the whole stupid thing should be abolished. One of the dumbest things about monarchies is that it's passed down to children.
The right people had sex, and you're the next leader of the country, whether it be a boy or girl.
Yeah, the Plantagenets are only in charge of this empire because they won a war. Doesn't mean they're good at governing. Then they just get to keep passing it on, which I did read that the Plantagenets are one of the most successful dynasties in history. A male Plantagenet heir ruled England from, was it Henry II? No, Henry, his father, is the one that actually won the empire. They didn't have the empire forever, but it was somebody from that line for 300 years. They were beat by the Tudors, and they only lasted 3 generations.
I will cut some slack to this whole thing about being in charge because you killed enough people and won a war, especially back in this era. what did I say, 840 years ago? Yeah, 840. And I'll also cut a little bit of slack, not much, to the whole, I was born to you, so I'm the next one in line, because that's what we do with things like wills, even in the modern era. I meant more today, where they still have royalty in a democracy in England, and we follow it too, and so does, I think, Australia and a lot of other countries. So that abolishment, I meant more about the modern era, since I've been alive.
And in the interest of talking about this film, I would say, obviously, Richard deserves to be king.
Oh, that's what I was going to say next, is that considering this Richard would end up being Richard the Lionhearted, I'd go with him. And even before I knew that, I would have said that he's easily the most qualified person for the job, of the three sons anyway.
Jeffrey probably would have made a good king too, but do any of us need a King Jeff? No. That's just, I'm sorry, I can't buy it. Jeffy. Inside joke. Although he does remind me a lot of a guy who maybe would have been good at ruling in Game of Thrones. Littlefinger. Yeah, he has very Littlefinger vibes.
Is it him or is it Richard is actually the son? I think it's him. The son of the King of France. But it's his mother that is Eleanor.
Yeah, they're all Henry's sons.
Okay, I misread that then.
But she was married to Louis first.
Who's Philip's father.
But she's not Philip's mother. Because she annulled her marriage to Louis after having nothing but daughters. In the movie, they imply that she fell in love with Henry and married him. But she would have been quite a bit older than him at the time. As
Hepburn was older than O'Toole by quite a lot. This is the rare case, especially back in the 60s, of the actor being so much younger than the actress.
But it kind of makes me think again of Game of Thrones, of Marjorie when she marries Tommen.
Yeah.
And she kind of seduces him, and it's all in pursuit of power.
And he loves it.
Oh, yeah, he loves it. But she's doing it in the interest of getting power. It's very easy to make an impressionable young man fall in love with you, especially when you look like Natalie Dormer.
She's probably about 10 years older than he is, give or take. In the storyline, I'm not sure about the actors. We say Richard, if anybody, should be in charge. Certainly not John. Game of Thrones was released by Embassy Pictures 55 years ago in October 1968, although it didn't come out in England, where, of course, the story is set until the very end of the year.
It was set in France. Their court is in Normandy, I think.
I thought they said they were in England.
That part of France was part of the English Empire at the time, but it is absolutely set in France. I think they shot it in France as well.
Oh, Chinon-Touraine, it says here, in the medieval Angevin Empire. Okay.
There's a thing with Richard the Lionhearted that even though he's this very famous English king, he only spent a total of something like 6 months in England in his entire life.
Right, because he's the guy that led the Crusades as well.
Right.
In Prince of Thieves, Sean Connery comes back from the Crusades at the very end of the film. Okay, so they're in France the whole time. All right, well, anyway, the people involved in making this movie are mostly English or, I guess, Irish for O'Toole.
I don't know if you can tell yet. This set me down a little rabbit hole about this empire.
Well, Anthony Harvey's historical flick seems to have done pretty well at the box office, and we're about to talk about its other kudos. But before we do, Bev, I think it's best if you remind us all what this story's about. How about giving us the skinny on The Lion in Winter?
Peter O'Toole is Henry II, and Katharine Hepburn is Eleanor of Aquitaine, his wife and prisoner of 10 years following an attempted coup with their eldest son, Henry. But Henry the Younger is dead now, and the king must choose a successor from his surviving 3 sons. It's under these circumstances that the family is reunited for Christmas along with King Philip of France, who's getting impatient for Henry to name an heir so his sister can marry them, consolidating alliances. Everyone has something to gain, something to lose, and no one is giving an inch. Christmas Eve is spent conniving, scheming, promising, and deceiving, all to leave things more or less where they started.
Right, yeah. And the sister, of course, half-sister, is Alice, played pretty well by Jane Marrow. Or, in a nutshell, kids suck, parents suck more, at least in this case. I know he's bad, but we can't let her off the hook either. Didn't she say, kill him, when Henry's got John in a could easily cut his throat situation in the basement at the end? No matter how much you don't love your son, you want your husband to kill him?
You could truly argue, does she love Richard? Seems to be the only son she cares about. She wants him to be king, but that could be something to do with Aquitaine. She thinks she'll get Aquitaine back, or...
And he wants it.
But does he have it? There's this back and forth.
And Henry wants John to have it, and if he's king, then he would have it, of course.
Yeah. She has her own selfish reasons for wanting Richard to be king. But the number one reason she wants him to be king is because it would make Henry mad. She just loves needling him and getting to him. And her motivations come and go. I really believe her performance is selling that she really loves Henry.
Yeah, she does. She says as much, and I believe when she says it, that that's sincere.
Certainly loves Richard.
In her way.
In her way.
But the other two, forget it, especially
Yeah,
John.
definitely no
John's such a loser.
And part of the reason why Henry loves John best is because he wasn't really raised by her. He's too young to have really been that influenced by her.
Well, also, he's supposed to be, and he's not, as the story goes on, loyal. I want the loyal one to be the one that follows me. But he might lose this kingdom in an hour if he's in charge. He's so incompetent and such a loser.
He did lose the kingdom in history.
Not in an hour.
Not in an hour. It took him longer than that. So maybe like 8 years after the events of this film, Richard did lead a coup against Henry and succeeded, and he became king. And he ruled for about 10 years, and then he died. John took over. His younger brother took over. And he lost the empire. He's kept England, Wales, Scotland. I don't know exactly what was left of it, but all of the holdings from Henry's conquests were lost under John, which they could have been lost under Richard too, for all we know. You can blame him because he was the one that happened to be in charge when things fell apart, but chances are it was always going to be a tenuous holding.
No. And Aquitaine, by the way, I looked it up. I didn't know where this was. It's the south of France. So it was quite a sail job for them to get around there. It's not like it's going to Dunkirk, where you're pretty close to England.
But it's a good strategic place. If it's in the south of France, it's on the Mediterranean.
Yeah. I just didn't know where it was before, so I found that out a few days ago. Okay, the Rotten Tomatoes numbers on this movie are great. 91% of critics like this film. 8.2 out of 10 is the average. There are 43 reviews on the site, 4.3. And 90% of audiences. This, according to, must be the numbers, was 10th at the 1968 U.S. box office. 2001 A Space Odyssey was number 2. The Odd Couple was number 3. We just covered that, 4 or 5 months ago, 6 months ago. Bullet was number 4. I covered that by myself a while back. And Planet of the Apes, I missed the T there, was number 7. So all those have been covered by us in the past, and they're all in the top 10. This won 3 Oscars. Hepburn tied Barbra Streisand in Funny Girl for Best Actress. That's not the only time I don't think it's ever been a tie, but one of the few in any category. Oh, yeah. I think it was the sound category a couple years ago. Maybe Skyfall tied with something. I feel like that happened in the more recent history, but it wasn't an acting award. James Goldman's adapted screenplay won, and John Barry's music score also took home trophies. Incidentally, one of the competitors for the score that year, I just mentioned it, Planet of the Apes.
Oh, well.
Which seems like the one it should have won.
Well, it's definitely the more memorable score. It's the one that we would all recognize today.
The score's good, but anyway. The film was nominated for 4 more Oscars. Best Picture, Anthony Harvey for Best Director, Peter O'Toole for Best Actor, and Margaret First was nominated for her costumes. Oliver won the big ones, picture and director. We covered that back in March or something, earlier this year. And Cliff Robertson and Charlie beat out O'Toole. Peter O'Toole had played Henry II in Beckett 4 years earlier, where Richard Burton is, I think, actually the main character in that. So that's a powerful duo to play off each other, which also got an Oscar nomination. It's one of the few people that's been nominated multiple times for the same role. Pacino did for The Godfather, and Stallone for playing Rocky a couple times. Well, lots of times, but nominated twice. But I asked this question, did O'Toole make enemies in Hollywood to never win a competitive Oscar despite 8 nominations? And he was great so often, and certainly in the nominations, I'd say. He probably should have won for Lawrence of Arabia, but that was the year of Peck and To Kill a Mockingbird, so not a bad choice, of course, and maybe Peck should have won for that above anything else. And O'Toole is still so young. 2 years later in Beckett doesn't win. That's Rex Harrison in My Fair Lady. We covered that as well, of course. This, probably should have won for this. Cliff Robertson's good, and Charlie is one of those guys. What's that? Flowers for Algernon story. We've seen that kind of thing done many times, but probably should have been O'Toole in this.
Well, we've seen King Lear many times, too. The plot of this film is a very well-worn story.
With boys instead of girls.
It's almost, How common is it now in storytelling? Game of Thrones is the King Lear story. Well, maybe not exactly King Lear story, but Succession would be a better example.
Yes, absolutely.
Almost directly. Righteous Gemstones also doing the same sort of thing.
Harvey won the DGA, but Carol Reed won the Best Director Oscar for Oliver. So that's one of the fairly rare times the Directors Guild picked one person and the Oscar went to someone else, because a lot of it's the same voters. This was Hepburn's 3rd Oscar. She had won the year before for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. And speaking of that, I watched the Oscar speeches. None of them were very long. Anthony Harvey accepted for Kate. She was never there. She presented to somebody around this time, maybe in the 70s. I don't remember who it was. Must be an old friend. But she never went when she won her own. Harvey walked up on stage with Barbra Streisand, helped her up. She actually almost fell, even though he was holding her hand, so she would have fallen if it hadn't been for him holding her hand. And I got thinking, why aren't there rails when they go up? Because we've seen this before. Jennifer Lawrence fell, almost fell at least.
All these women are wearing these shoes.
But it's because it would block the view of people the whole night. As soon as I thought it, I thought, well, that's exactly why. It blocked the view. I guess you could make a glass thing, but then it would still be a distorted view. What Harvey said on Hepburn's behalf is that she's thrilled that she broke the record for the most nominations ever and now has the most wins. And also, that meant she passed Spencer Tracy, because he had won twice in a row in the 30s, and she had 2. Now this is 3. She went on to win another one for On Golden Pond, which we've covered. And I don't think she cared about breaking his record, but there you go. She had. I don't know if he had the record. Did he? Other people had won twice, I guess. But no one else had won 3 times. And only a few people ever have since. Nicholson, Day-Lewis, McDormand, and that's maybe it for acting.
Marilyn
Streep.
Yeah.
And Streep as well has won
Said
3 in
Meryl
total.
Streep, yeah.
And of course, Spencer Tracy had died not that long before she made this movie, so...
Yeah, there's a story about her accepting the part. Nobody really expected her to say yes. They knew she would be best for the part. They couldn't imagine anyone else doing it. Peter O'Toole tells a story about getting the call, that she said yes, that she would do it. It truly must have been a case of needing distraction because she was still freshly grieving.
Also, she's a professional and she wants to act. John Barry, who won for the score, wasn't there either. It was so common back in those days. You don't really see it much anymore. Anyway, so he wasn't there, and Peck, who presented the trophy, accepted it on his behalf. James Goldman's Oscar clip on YouTube is, I think, 1:22 in total, and that includes the person, I think Sinatra, maybe, naming all the names. He goes up on stage. That's all he spoke for was maybe 20 seconds. All he really said was, other people have said the smiles of joy on the Oscar stage are really smiles of relief, and he can't tell us how relieved he is. That was about it. Didn't thank anybody, didn't thank the director, didn't thank his brother, William Goldman.
Thank them for what?
And then he left. So those 3 speeches were duds. I went through talking about all that. There wasn't that much to say, I guess, really. And this was nominated for one more thing, the AFI's Top 25 Music Scores. I guess that makes sense when it wins the Oscar that it would be. I'm sure Barry has a lot that were nominated for that list. Okay, we've been talking for a long time now. I'm a big fan of this film. What about you?
I like it fine. My lukewarm enthusiasm...
Is it all the yelling all the time?
I feel very bad about not liking this movie more. It's the same guilt I feel for not liking Shakespeare more. I can appreciate the wit and the performances, which are as great as everyone says they are. But after a couple of hours of this, I was fighting sleep too hard to pay attention to it all. And it's funny, I was thinking about how I was rapt by Jean Dielmont, a 3-hour film where virtually nothing happens. But I always struggle with films where language is the main event, and I don't know why. You're a much faster reader than I am.
Get out of town.
Hey. And I wonder,
No, I don't mean you. A guy who talks like this reads fast? What a shock.
I feel like films that have language that's this dense, and Shakespeare is guilty of this too, I can't really keep up with it. So I'm still appreciating one line, and they've moved on to the next thing. I'm just trying to explain why movies like this don't tend to really turn my crank that much, but I have nothing but praise for the film.
It's not the best shot or anything like that. It looks fine, but...
It's a little pedestrian. They let the script and the actors do all the heavy lifting, that's for sure.
Well, it does betray stage origins, and it was a stage play first. Goldman wrote that for the stage, and O'Toole's a great actor, but he is playing to the back of the theater. That's a huge theater. He's playing to the back of the Coliseum sometimes. He's also angry. He has a reason to be yelling, but he's really yelling.
Yeah, he's being really dramatic. He does some great physical stuff, too, that is tantrum-esque, very over the top. Yeah. I saw this great interview with Hopkins. This was his film debut, as it was Timothy Dalton's film debut, which is incredible that these two legends of British cinema had the same film debut.
Yeah, one goes on to do Bond, and the other one goes on to do Hannibal Lecter, and many other things, but Hannibal Lecter especially.
Anthony Hopkins is one of the best actors of his generation. He said that Katharine Hepburn, who of course he was in awe of, gave him this one piece of advice. She says, "Don't act. You have a good face and you have a good body. Just be. Leave the acting to me. I'll act all over the place." She did. And he said it was great advice, and he took it.
Yeah, he didn't do very much in this role. Maybe that's for the best.
His small moments are big. His arguments with his mother and his moments with his brothers. But the one that, really moved me is when he's with Timothy Dalton, King Philip. He's hiding, and Philip is talking with his father about how they had a sexual relationship when he was very young, when Philip was young, implying that it was manipulative and that Richard was taking advantage of him. And he bursts out of the bed, and he's like, "How dare you? We had something." Well, he was in the bed. Bed curtains around him, that's where he was hiding. And he bursts out, and the look of hurt on his face, along with shame and everything that goes along with everything that's happening in this scene, is this desperation of, it wasn't like that. His feelings are so hurt in that moment, and he's more vulnerable in that moment than in any other moment of the film.
Later on that same scene, he says something to his father about, "I just wanted you to love me," or something like that. And it's not as big as a lot of actors have played that type of scene with an unloving parent. It's actually pretty small by Hopkins standards, because we said he doesn't really do that much in this movie, but it's probably his other most emotional moment in the whole film, and it's not that long after what you just said. Mm-hmm. Also, it's interesting to think that if Richard ended up marrying Alice, who's Henry's lover, in both cases, Henry still would have been with her, if you will, especially if she was with John, of course. There's no doubt that she would have been in Henry's bed, if not every night, then most nights.
I think he says to her, John wouldn't mind if you and I carried on after you were married. Henry, as he's portrayed in this film, would happily father her children, even, instead of his son. These are two pretty incestuous things going on. We have Richard having an affair with Philip, who's Philip's little sister might become his bride. She is sleeping with Henry, Richard's father. You have this very incestuous situation going on.
Something we hear later on where Eleanor says about how she slept with...
Henry's father.
It wasn't an affair. She slept with him. I don't remember if it was supposed to be an affair, but she talks about that. He just went, la, 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 doesn't want to hear it. And so she was with his dad. That would be a strange thing to hear in the modern era, wouldn't it?
Do you think there's an implication that Eleanor and Richard had some kind of sexual relationship?
Maybe. I didn't think about it, but maybe.
She's talking to Henry, and they're kind of exchanging all of their hurts and insults and stuff. He says to her, you threw me out of bed for Richard. And she retorts, you threw me out of bed for Rosamond. Now, you could say she threw him out of bed because she had a son who she cared about more. Like a lot of marriages, they experience bed death because children get in the way, and mom just likes their son better than she likes her husband. Except that she doesn't deny any implications with the bed thing, and immediately retorts with a woman that we know was Henry's lover, as if they're even. There's nothing explicit in her conversations with Richard, but in that scene where she's begging him to trust her, they're outside, and her approach is like a seduction. She physically gets so uncomfortably close to him, begs him to remember what it was like when they were close, when they held hands. She starts by describing the lust she had for Henry when they were first getting together, and she had to annul her husband. She says, well, we broke all of the 10 Commandments in that one night. And Richard's discomfort in that moment is palpable. It just doesn't feel anything like a mother and son. I know their relationship is unconventional, but I feel like there was a subtext there. I didn't read this anywhere. I kind of expected to see somewhere someone else say, is there an implication that she was sleeping with Richard? And maybe I'm imagining it, but especially when you put it in context that this is a family where there's so many other inappropriate things going on.
Well, to have pure blood, this is I guess even true now, but certainly back in this time frame, you might very well sleep with somebody who's technically related to you. Not even so much technically, but somebody who's absolutely related to you. Whether it be your mother, your father, your sister, your brother.
Which is the point if you're trying to make a clean bloodline, which we know happened. Look at the Habsburgs. There's plenty of evidence that in Europe, cousins marrying cousins over and over again led to some pretty intense inbreeding.
It's funny that we call it pure then, because this seems like it's not pure at all. We wouldn't do it now. Well, maybe some royal families do. I think it's very possible, yeah. I don't think John's doing anything with anybody else. But...
Ew, no. Nigel Terry, who plays John, he just about ruins the film for me.
You mentioned this a few times, you didn't like his performance. It was his debut too, by the way.
Stands out so much from all the other performances.
Yeah.
Which, of course, they chew the scenery, but there's a certain kind of dignity, whereas Nigel Terry is playing it like a cartoon character. He does all this intense mouth acting. His jaw's constantly dropped. He sticks his tongue out when he's threatened. So exaggerated. He has this frown that he wears through most of the film. It's this cartoonish exaggeration of a frown. And his posture, the way he moves, it's like he's a hunchback or something. It's not even like he's a normal, able-bodied guy. We get it. It's way too much, way over the top. Just isn't really consistent with the way the rest of the film is.
Terry went on to play King Arthur in Excalibur about, 13 years later? And also was in Troy with Peter O'Toole. I don't know if they share any scenes together, but they're both in Troy. The way we're introduced to all the characters is interesting, too, because, of course, you've got the duel with the king and John. The king easily could kill him if he wanted to actually do that, but he wants him to be his heir apparent. Richard wins a joust, but can't kill the opponent. I don't know, you're supposed to kill people in jousts anyway.
Are you?
And it wasn't like it was some big event.
People died all the time.
Seems like it was practice as well for jousting. Why would you kill the guy? And Jeffrey's watching a sword fight on the beach. They're on horses and whatnot. That's how they're introduced. But it's also Christmas time. This movie doesn't really feel like Christmas at any point. They talked about presents at one point.
You see the presents. You never see them unwrap presents.
Was there a tree? I don't remember.
There's a tree, which I think that's a real anachronism, because Christmas trees were introduced with Prince Albert. He's the one who brought Christmas trees. It was a German tradition.
German, right? Yeah. Germany, yeah.
So that's many hundreds of years later.
And because he wants his family around him, he lets Eleanor out for Christmas, and I guess he's right there. So if she's in jail in Aquitaine, then yeah, you'd have to be. I should have realized that she's there in that prison. He's got to trust that his troops are loyal to him then, because It wouldn't be that hard for some of the French people to come in there and say, we're taking you out. And then again, I guess there's war, big-time war if they did that.
She already led a almost successful revolt against him, and it's implied that it wasn't even the first time that she tried to overthrow him.
Yeah. Well, I'll do what happens next, by the way, right now, because at the end of the film, they have their last little tete-a-tete, and they're both smiling. I don't know why she's smiling as she goes up to prison. I guess it's a fun way to play it. What does he say? Something like, we'll never die. And then the credits roll. But what happens next is, and you have to ignore the fact there's reality here with John and Richard and so on. But he walks back in the castle and takes a shiv in the guts from one of the sons, if not all three of them. And maybe the daughters too, because they're not really a part of the story at all.
Yeah, there's all these daughters that we never even meet, right?
And even Alice. And she's smart, by the way, when she says to him, if you're going to marry me, you're going to have to keep these guys in jail for the rest of their lives because they'll absolutely try to kill my sons. We talk about Game of Thrones. Well, that's what the Bolton, what's his name, Ramsay? Yeah. He kills his father, and does he kill the baby?
Yeah.
Ugh, I forgot he killed the baby in that show.
Oh, yeah, he's a bad guy.
Because he's a bastard, and this baby would have been pureborn. She's pretty good, I thought. I said that earlier, didn't I? Jane Marrow in this movie.
Quite lovely.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we talk about ages. I see in my notes right here that Philip is 17. Dalton looks older than that, obviously, but he's only 17 years old, and yet he's ruling a country. And he wants Richard to marry his sister, his half-sister, just like Eleanor. And we do too. We're all rooting for this, or at least most of us are rooting for this. And certainly not the, I guess, middle son. No, he must be the youngest, right? John must be the youngest.
Yeah, John's the youngest.
One of the details I like about this movie, actually, is the same thing that Lucas did with Star Wars, to some degree at least. They brought in the costumes for 3PO and R2, and especially 3PO, gleaming and polished. But they're supposed to have been through battles and wars and stuff, so he just literally threw these costumes in the sand in Tunisia when they were shooting to be Tatooine. He wanted them to look like they'd been through some things. You get the same thing here. Harvey has these people not looking regal all the time. The king wears his crown once, and as soon as he gets back in his chambers, he takes it off. Did I not say to you, almost every crown I've ever seen looks stupid. And this one doesn't look like something you'd want to wear. The ones that both Charles and his mother obviously wore it for, 60 plus years, 70 plus years she had that crown, or a crown anyway. They look so stupid. Look like the water buffalo's hats they wear in the Flintstones.
You know, it's funny. They look like costumes from like Party City, but it's because the costumes are always based on these. These are kind of the archetypal crowns, especially for people who are part of the empire, like we are, the Commonwealth.
What they're wearing is expensive, but it looks cheap.
But it looks cheap because we've seen so many corny recreations of it.
But for the most part in this story, it's almost like if we were wearing, as we are now, comfortable clothes, and we went outside and put on better clothes, and then came inside and immediately got looking like this again, but had these kinds of fights and battles and arguments with our family. But we're not wearing formal clothes. We're not walking around with a three-piece suit on.
Straight, clean teeth notwithstanding, they do look like people who could have lived back then. Their hair is greasy. They're not really all that well kempt. Because this is the 12th century, you know? We're talking some real Dark Ages action here. And it's cool to see a castle where there's straw on the ground everywhere, where there's dogs just wandering around. The King of England and half of France has to kick chickens out of the way when he's going places.
And these people are not really paying attention to the fact that he's wandering through them. They're not doing the, oh, God, we better bow down to the king.
We think of royalty with the pageantry of the post-Renaissance. You know, we think of the Tudors, we think of the Bourbons of France. We think of these later, wealthier, and just more technologically advanced iterations of royalty, but this is what it looked like in the Middle Ages.
It is pretty authentic, although I would think that a royal movie would have them look like they do. Well, we think they would anyway, but they're more real people. They're not real people, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if Katharine Hepburn's costume with that cowl that comes right up over her chin, it looks like it's physically holding her chin up. She's always looking up. She always looks uncomfortably.
Maybe so.
Yeah. But it could just be Katharine Hepburn with her
That's how she wanted to play it.
Face.
By the way, I said they're not real people. I know these are based on real people, but I meant they're not regular people. That's what I should have said. They're not regular people. But they're more regular than you'd expect in a movie about kings and queens.
And for the record, as much as this is based on what really happened in this family, this whole thing is an invention. There was no record that they spent a Christmas together and tried to actually sort all these things out. You look at the history of this particular family, and you could assume that this was at least the kind of thing that was on their mind.
A key scene in the film is when the king demands that Richard and Alice not only get married, although he wanted John to be in charge, now he's saying, fine, it'll be Richard, but they get married right now. And then
in exchange for Aquitaine, and he would give her freedom.
And then Richard gets mad and leaves, which is obviously the king playing him and Eleanor figuring that would happen. He's a very smart king, of course. But Eleanor wanted that until it doesn't work out so well. So she gets one-upped. She gets one-upped a few times in this movie. She's a smart woman, but
she loses.
He beats her once or twice, and then in the end she goes back to jail. How nice of you to let me out. It's only for the holidays. I guess the most powerful scene in the whole film, though, from Henry's standpoint and what makes him storm off and wants to go to have the marriage annulled. Seems like this movie takes place in about a day, and a lot does happen. But it's when he finds out that all three sons were in Philip's bedroom, hidden, including John, with Geoffrey. The one he doesn't trust is Geoffrey, but the one he did trust is John. O'Toole plays it big a lot in this movie. I thought he could have played that moment even bigger because, I said this earlier, the one thing he gets from John, or he thought so anyway, is loyalty. And now he's not even loyal? He's completely useless, and that's, I guess, why I understand why he wants to just say, well, screw all you guys, I'm going to start fresh with somebody else.
John is as loyal as his opportunities. It just happened that John wasn't really exposed to his brothers or his mother, so he didn't work out his options all that well. Plus, he's so young.
Yes.
And as he plays it here, developmentally challenged, apparently.
Yeah. But the king denies them. He says, I deny you, and does a lot of yelling. There's a good scene, too, where Eleanor visits Alice, and she might as well be her mother. She's not literally her mother, but she might as well be. So
she helped raise her. She grew up in the court, which makes it also extra creepy that Henry's having an affair with her.
Right. Might as well be their daughter.
He kind of raised her, yeah.
Yeah, so they have a squabble, and then they hug as well. But she says she'll block another heir, and that's where she gets into the whole thing about, I was with your father, which really drives him into a rage. The last maybe 30 minutes or so, he's constantly angry, except the very end when he's smiling as he sends her off.
It's kind of hard to believe that these two people never actually give in and have sex for this entire movie because they are so turned on. They're more hot for the hate they have each other than any love they ever had for each other.
Yep. I said before that she's toxic as well, even though he's a bad king, and certainly the way he treats his sons. Although I don't blame him for being mad at them and maybe even wanting to disown them, I guess. But she brings 3 daggers down to them when they're in that basement. First they're in jail, right? Then they're in the basement. But in any case, they're
he jails them in the wine cellar. He's mad. He jails them. And that's when Alice says, you either have to keep them down there forever or you have to let them go. You can't marry me and have children and disown them without risking everything.
Yeah, they can't just live their lives out in the countryside doing what they want to do.
You can't pussyfoot around this decision. You either have to have the guts to kill your children
or
you have to live with them.
And they do all pull the daggers. John probably should be killed. The king overpowers him easily, but he can't kill him. He can't kill any of them. And he lets them all go. Oh, and I wrote it here. Execute him. That's what she says to him. If I quote it, that usually means it's exactly what the actor said. I guess Hepburn said, execute him. Execute your son.
And she's talking about John. His performance in that moment. He looks like a cartoon character.
Yeah.
Sticking his tongue out in this really unnatural way and his eyes are bugging out. This is not how humans act.
I would be curious to see what, if there was another scene after this with the boys, what would have happened, because the movie ends in the right way with the two of them having their last scene together and then credits, but it feels like it should have been another scene at some point because they all just walk off when he lets them go. He sentences them all to death with the sword, but he can't cut Richard in half, and if he can't do that, then he can't beat any of them, I guess. And the queen knows she's lost her king, and they'll never get him back.
And this is the part of the film I found a little frustrating, that it just does end exactly where it starts. It takes the stakes away from everything that was going on.
Bit of a Waiting for Godot thing.
Yeah.
All that for nothing. Maybe that's the point. I guess this is the point by Goldman. Pomp and circumstance, big fury, big moments. It ended up meaning nothing. It didn't have to mean nothing, but it did. So Peter O'Toole, who's, by the way, way too young for this role. Not just that he's that much younger than Hepburn, but he also was too young to play 50. He's supposed to be 50 in this movie, or about 50, which is what I'm going to be in a couple months. But he was only mid-30s. Let's just double check.
I think you said he was 35?
O'Toole was born.
He's 32. I can see it from here.
Oh, over there. I missed that.
August 1932. So he would have been 35, depending on what time of year they shot this.
Yeah.
Maybe 36.
But he doesn't seem like he's too young, at least. Just like Dalton seems to be way too old to be 17.
Yeah.
You know, if they ever remake this movie, who should, even now, but certainly a few years ago, should have played the Dalton role? Chalamet,
yeah.
O'Toole was in Lawrence of Arabia, the only other time we've ever covered him, and he's great in that. And you don't like Ratatouille, but it's still one of my favorite scenes in any movie is when he plays the critic, the food critic, who talks about critics don't take chances, but sometimes they do. It's a great voiceover he has when he's playing Ego, talking about how the rat that makes food made great food for him.
In defense of everybody who's mad at me for not liking Ratatouille, I actually hated it so much that I never made it to that scene.
You should at least watch that scene then.
I think I have seen that scene. I think it comes up on social media, and I've watched it here and there.
The average piece of junk means more to people than whatever. Yeah, great voice. Katharine Hepburn won those 4 Oscars I talked about. We've covered 3 of the 4 movies now because Morning Glory we didn't cover and won't. But Guess Who's Coming to Dinner was the year before this, and then On Golden Pond are 3 of the 4. We've also done Bringing Up Baby, The Philadelphia Story, both with Cary Grant, who I'm covering in a movie at the end of this week. Adam's Rib, with, of course, Spencer. The African Queen, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and On Golden Pond. Apparently, Hepburn laid down the law with O'Toole. I don't know if it was before filming or after she saw what he was like. Well, she heard his reputation. She told him, you got to behave, you can't be out carousing, which apparently Hopkins did too, and don't be late showing up on set, whether you're drunk or you're hungover or what have you. And I think he still did this, but he apparently was a little bit afraid of her at least, and was better behaved than he was in a lot of films. When he plays the character, another nomination for the character in My Favorite Year, he apparently is playing a version of Errol Flynn, but it could be himself too, because Flynn was a huge drinker, and I don't know about fighter in the case of O'Toole. Flynn was known to be a brawler, but O'Toole was a huge partier.
Yeah, she just wants them to be professionals, I guess, which reminds me of the stories from the set of African Queen.
Yes.
That they all partied pretty hardy there, too.
Anthony Hopkins, before this year, had only ever been in Silence of the Lambs for Us, which of course is a great role, won the Oscar for that. We're going to watch The Father again one of these days. Maybe we'll cover it one of these days. Great film. He won the Oscar for that. And we did cover Remains of the Day, so that was the third one so far. That was only a few weeks ago. Great performance in that as well. John Castle is... double-checking. Yeah, he's Jeffrey. I thought so. He worked for a long time, including on Blow Up, which was, what, a year before this? A couple years before this? But mostly did TV. I talked about Nigel Terry's credits. Tim Dalton, So Funny in Hot Fuzz. We covered that almost 2 years ago. Stay back, or the ginger nut gets it.
Ow, this really hurts.
This really hurts. Of course, his most famous thing is James Bond in the 80s, twice. And then Jane Merrill worked for nearly 60 years, did some movies, but a ton of television shows. Anthony Harvey was only his second movie as a director. He did They Might Be Giants, which Goldman wrote as well. Goldman wrote, and this was his debut, by the way, writing screenplays. Oh, wow. He's just more of a theater guy. But he wrote They Might Be Giants, Nicholas and Alexandra, and Robin and Marion. A lot of Anns in there. Anyway, so Harvey directed There Might Be Giants, and he edited Lolita and Dr. Strangelove.
Yeah, that's right. He was an editor before.
For Kubrick, before any of this. Apparently, these characters should have been speaking French. But
yeah, and they were all French.
You don't have to subtitle the movie, and you got to cast French actors if you do that. They wanted these actors, so you're not going to go that route, I guess. This is based on Goldman's 1966 play. Robert Preston played Henry on stage, and Christopher Walken played Philip.
No way.
So it wasn't one of the most major roles, but there you go, young Walken. The producer was Martin Pohl. His credits aren't that impressive. He worked on Nighthawks, which is a pretty good movie with Stallone and I think Billy D. Williams in the early 80s. And he was an executive producer on Woody Allen's Love and Death, which I watched again not long ago. It's pretty funny. But not much else stood out. You make this movie, you produce it, get nominated for an Oscar, you think that, and maybe he should have won. I think this is better than Oliver. Anyway, the movie's 2-3-5-1. We watched it on our spotty DVD. It didn't look that bad, but it wasn't great. It was on TCM actually a few days ago, which is pointless to say now, I guess, because it's in the past. I wanted to promote that when I noticed it. I always look up the listings to see if there's movies we can A, watch, or B, review. But it happened a couple days ago. Maybe people saw the movie and are listening to us now. Hi. Cinematographer Douglas Slocum. He did the Indiana Jones trilogy. And the third one was his final movie of any kind. He also shot Rollerball in the mid-'70s, which Chris and I covered on Scoring at the Movies. John Bloom cut it. I guess Anthony Harvey probably had a lot to say, being a former editor and working for Kubrick for all those years. Anyway, Bloom was the editor, the only one credited. He won the Oscar for Gandhi. A long movie to win the Oscar. Sometimes, though, the epics do win. Lord of the Rings, I think, won the third movie for its editing, and Schindler's List is really long. It won. Anyway, he won the Oscar for Gandhi. He also cut Mike Nichols' last 3 or 4 projects, I think including some of the TV stuff that Nichols did. And I already said the composer John Barry won the Oscar for this. He had 7 nominations, and he won 5 times. That's an incredible percentage. He'd won, I think, twice already for Born Free, the song and the music. He won for Dances with Wolves as well. And Midnight Cowboy was a score of his as well. And also, it's not his theme, the ding 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 in Bond. I believe it's Monty Norman that wrote that, but he did do a lot of the Bond themes. So I guess he probably worked with Tim Dalton in a way, or at least saw him on a screen when he was composing music. I think he was doing the music into the 80s when Dalton did those 2 Bond films. All right, so what do you think about the look, the cutting, and the music?
Well, like I said before, I don't think it's particularly inspired. It's competent, but nothing all that special.
What happens next? I already said Henry takes a shiv in the guts. Although that's not real because they're real people.
Well, eventually, I don't
in
know
a way,
exactly
I'm right,
how
right.
Richard took him out, but Richard did take him out.
It wasn't Christmas Day.
It was years later.
Incidentally, they made an Emmy-winning TV movie with Glenn Close and Patrick Stewart in 2003. Close, I'm sure, played the king, and Stewart played Eleanor. Reverse that. She's top billed, too, even though in this it is O'Toole. And it is his movie more than hers, so we don't see her for a little while, for one thing, when she's oared in there on a big boat. A huge boat to bring one person. But then it's also the queen.
She's the queen. She's the queen.
She's the bloody queen, Spencer. All right, then, last thoughts on our last movie together of this year, The Lion in Winter.
Well, I'm feeling pretty festive right now. I don't know about you, but this got me right in the Christmas mood.
I thought it might be more of a Christmas movie when I saw that it was listed as one.
It's literally a Christmas movie.
Yeah, it is, but I thought it'd be more about Christmas. What was the other one we covered that wasn't really true about? Well, Grumpy Old Men has a Christmas scene at the end. That's actually fair to call that.
Trading Places. We really are stretching the definition of Christmas movie because we just don't want to cover dumb Christmas movies.
You hated Love Actually. That's the main reason we didn't do that.
I hate it so much.
Because it is 20 years old. It'd be interesting to watch the movie. Well, then again, it's been criticized by a lot of people other than just you.
I'm in good company.
While others love it. For some people, it's their favorite Christmas movie.
I think at this point, even people who love it with a caveat, which is fair. I love White Christmas, a deeply flawed, messed up movie that is kind of dumb. And actually more of a propaganda war movie than it is a Christmas movie. But I love it with all my heart anyway. You know, nostalgia is a hell of a drug.
And do your line from Love Actually.
I'm not sad because me mum died. I'm sad because I'm in love.
Well, I might have no use for what these regal SOBs stand for, but I enjoyed the hell out of them for 135 minutes. I liked it a lot more than you, obviously.
Yeah.
I do like the literate stuff, I guess. I kept up well enough.
Yeah, we didn't really get into what you love about the movie.
I love the huge performances because they do basically make sense. It is cool to see Hopkins and Dalton when they're so young and so new to acting. And Hopkins didn't really ever hit stardom until Silence of the Lambs because he was in a big role, really in a way the main role in Elephant Man, but that was an Oscar-nominated movie and pretty well acclaimed, but I didn't really truly... was he doing much in the 80s that people would know? I don't think he was.
He was like a working actor, I guess. He was probably a that guy actor until Silence of the Lambs.
This does feel like a slightly opened-up stage play, by the way, but that's maybe because it's a director who's only done one other movie before. All the requisite roaring to the back row. But the cast is a feast with the dialogue. That's what I like about it, too. They're really good.
You love some good scenery chewing.
Not always. But it might be Hepburn's best of her Oscar-winning roles.
A sentiment I read over and over again, just virtually every review that I read of this film agreed with you right there.
I love On Golden Pond, but it's not her best of the four. I don't remember Morning Glory at all, but Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Really? She was good. She's never really bad in anything. But Oscar-winning for that? Yeah, and I thought about covering Funny Girl by myself quite a few months ago, but I already did a Barbra Streisand movie this year. Finally got her on this channel for the first time ever by doing that. So I didn't do Funny Girl. Maybe I'll do it, or will do it one of these days, though, because it was on all kinds of AFI lists. It won her the Oscar. I think it was a pretty big hit. William Wyler directed it. Anyway, so that was how we saw The Lion in Winter. I'll be back on the mic this Friday. I'll be talking about a Cary Grant film once again, but the reason I chose this movie is that Shirley Temple will get to make her debut on this channel. It's been a theme for me this year, getting Streisand earlier this year, and Shirley Temple, Mae West, Rita Hayworth. Made sure to cover people like that, and movies that a lot of people might say, why are you doing Gilda? Why are you doing Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer? For these reasons. So anyway, it is The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer on December 29th. Our last show, well, my last show of the year. This is our last show of the year right now. So that will be the final podcast posted on this channel this year. It'll be the 77th of the year, which smashes our previous high by something like 20. We've done maybe mid-50s
well, that's
in the
all
past.
Thanks to you.
Because I did nearly 30 on my own. And if you wanted to hear words about classic movies in 2023, then we were more than ever the people to turn to, I think. When it's the two of us talking to each other on the mic again, it'll be 2024. We'll air a special show on New Year's Day. Probably not until the middle of the day, whenever I get up. We'll be partying that night. Unless I decide I want to post it in the middle of the night when I can barely see straight. And we'll be talking about our favorite movies of 2023, what we've seen. I've seen over 100 at this point. You haven't, but that's a lot. But we won't have seen everything zeitgeisty, so we're going to miss out on some stuff. But what we've seen, what we like the best. And we'll talk about some of our favorite moments. That's the part I actually really want to do more than the movies themselves, or lines of dialogue. And for the first time in a very long time, we'll open up the email bag and see what you guys have had to say to us or about us in the past several months. We're answering some things that were said to us almost a year ago. I really was delinquent in responding to messages. There's no real trivia or opinion questions for a special show like that. And we can't even promote that you get your questions in to get them discussed because we will have recorded that show by the time that you'd hear that with this one. So I'll just let Bev do her thing at the end here and take it away.
All right, so tune in to next week's end of the year, somewhat spectacular.
Well, the beginning of the next year, really, in a way.
Right, yeah, beginning of 2024 spectacular. You already know how to find us, but let me remind you to favorite or subscribe wherever you listen, which is also where you can find our archive of hundreds of episodes that are available for free. Want to give us a Christmas present? Well, you could leave us a rating and a review. It's a great way to support the podcast. We really appreciate it.
There's still time. It's only when I post this, I don't know, early in the day on December 24th.
A last-minute Christmas present. We're both on Twitter. I'm at Bev Ellis and Ryan is at MovieFiend51. Or you can also reach us by email, haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com. And you can find our podcast on YouTube. Our channel is at HYES Ellis. And to enjoy freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada and the US, please go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES and enjoy a 20% discount.
Those of us who live in France can't get that coffee, can we? I don't do her or Cary Grant very well, but it's fun to do them. Merry Christmas and happy holidays to all. And to all, we thank you for listening. Ho, 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 and so on.
And cut.